Today in the Daily Dose, the age of exploration. Marco Polo. Born in 1254 Venice, Italy, Marco Polo learned the mercantile trade from his father and uncle, Nicola and Maffeo, who first met 15-year-old Marco in 1269 after an equally long journey into Asia, where the two traders met Yuan dynasty Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan. Nicola and Maffeo's return to Venice was in response to Kublai Khan's request to bring back oil from the lamp of Jerusalem, as well as a written request to the Pope in Rome, seeking 100 Christians acquainted with the 7 arts, which comprised grammar, rhetoric, logic, geometry, arithmetic, music, and astronomy. Soon after their reunion, Marco joined his father and uncle on an epic journey back to Asia, following the Silk Road into China, where in 1272 they were received yet again by the royal court of Kublai Khan. The emperor was taken by Marco's intelligence and humility, appointing the young man to serve as Khan's foreign emissary. In response, Marco was sent out on diplomatic missions throughout the Asian continent, including present-day Burma, India, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, and Vietnam, as well as extensive travels through China that went on for 17 years. Sometime around 1291, the Polos accompanied 17-year-old Mongol Princess Kokachin on a wedding voyage to Persia, a journey involving 600 men and women. By the time of their arrival, only 18 in the wedding party remained alive, including the princes and the Polos. When the Polos returned home after a 24-year absence, Marco was captured and thrown in prison due to a war between Venice and Genoa, where his cellmate was the popular romance novelist Rustichello da Pisa, who dictated Marco's adventures in the Orient. Marco published his wildly popular The Travels of Marco Polo upon his release from prison in 1299, and while the book has been criticized as dramatically embellished by Rustichello, the book provided Europeans with a vivid picture of the East's geography and customs, including the first Western record of porcelain, coal, gunpowder, and paper money. Marco's written account would later inspire the likes of Christopher Columbus and many other travelers, while profoundly influencing European cartography and the introduction of the Fra Mauro map. After settling in Venice, Marco became a wealthy merchant, raising 3 children with his wife Donata, before passing away in 1324 at 70 years of age. On his deathbed, Marco Polo uttered his now famous last words, "I have only told the half of what I saw." John Cabot. Born Giovanni Caboto in 1450 Genoa, John Cabot moved to Venice as a young man, where he worked the spice trade in the Levant or Eastern Mediterranean. Studying navigation and mapmaking during his merchant years, like his contemporary Christopher Columbus, Cabot became intrigued in the possibility of reaching the rich markets of Asia by sailing in a westerly direction. Moving to Valencia and later Seville, possibly due to outstanding debts, Cabot worked as a maritime engineer with varying degrees of success, moving to the British port city of Bristol in late 1495, where he worked tirelessly to convince the British Crown that a shorter route to Asia was possible by sailing a more northerly heading than the one Columbus had taken. After King Henry VII issued letters patent to Cabot and his son in 1496, Cabot set sail on a small caravel named Matthew in May of 1947 with a crew of 18, following an aborted first attempt in 1496. Making landfall in America on June 24th, the first European to do so since Leif Erikson's 11th century landfall. While the exact location of Cabot's explorations have been disputed, many pointing to southern Labrador, the island of Newfoundland, or Cape Breton Island, Cabot was the first to hoist both the English and Venetian flags on North American soil. Believing he had reached Asia's northeast coast, Cabot explored the region now known as the Cabot Strait, naming such points of interest as Cape Discovery, the island of St. John, and the Grand Banks off the east coast of Canada, where his crew caught an abundance of codfish by simply dipping baskets into the water. After his return to England, in late 1497, Cabot set sail on a second expedition in February of 1498, this time with 5 ships and 300 men, with plans to continue westward past his original landfalls, with an expectation of reaching Japan. While one caravel was forced to land in Ireland due to storm damage, many historians believe that Cabot and his remaining crew perished in a severe storm, while some evidence suggests that Cabot and his crew may have lived out their lives in North America. Other documents suggest that he and his crew quietly returned to England amongst precious little fanfare. What is known is that Cabot's proof of a shorter route to the New World was the spark of discovery behind Britain's future land claims in Canada, as well as the establishment of Britain's 13 colonies in North America, making John Cabot an influential figure during the Age of Exploration. Christopher Columbus and the New World. After surviving a pirate-induced shipwreck as a young merchant seaman, Christopher Columbus studied mathematics, astronomy, cartography, and navigation in Lisbon, Portugal, where he embraced the radical theory that a yet undiscovered Northwest Passage was a viable shortcut between Europe and Asia. Hungry for fame and fortune, Columbus's petitions for funding a voyage were turned down by Portugal and England, until Spanish King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile agreed to fund the explorer in return for 90% of whatever riches Columbus could bring home to Spain. Columbus set sail on August 3, 1492, aboard the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, making landfall in mid-October on most likely the Bahamian island of San Salvador, spending the next few months island hopping the Caribbean, a place he wrongly mistook for the East Indies. While his detailed diary entries mention everything from encountered wildlife, weather, and the shifting moods of his crew, he also noted that the local Taino people were perfect candidates for enslavement. Leaving several dozen men behind at his settlement on Hispaniola, Columbus sailed for Spain, returning to what is now the northeast coast of Haiti in September of 1493, where he found his settlement destroyed. Leaving his brothers Bartolomeo and Diego behind to rebuild his colony, Columbus would continue his fruitless search for gold and other valuables, at the same time sending 500 enslaved people to Queen Isabella in lieu of gold or other riches. Believing that any people Columbus claimed for Spain were therefore Spanish subjects, a horrified Isabella returned the explorers' gift to their native homeland. Columbus would make a third voyage to the New World in 1498, and while he failed to discover the Americas, historians now know that Viking explorer Leif Erikson made landfall in Newfoundland in the 11th century, long before Columbus reached the Caribbean. During his third voyage, Columbus enslaved many Taino Indians, forcing them to search for gold or work on his plantations, resulting in his arrest upon his return to Spain, charged with barbaric acts of torture in his governance of Hispaniola. After he was cleared of the most serious charges and stripped of his noble titles, in 1502, he persuaded the 2 Spanish monarchs to fund him on a fourth voyage that same year, where he made landfall in Panama, just miles from the Pacific Ocean. Returning to Spain empty-handed, Columbus passed away in 1506, yet his voyages sparked centuries of exploration and exploitation of the American continents, forever altering the makeup, history, and migrations of the New World.
the Aztecs of Mesoamerica. Arriving into Mesoamerica in the early 13th century from their northern homeland of Aztlan, when the Aztecs saw an eagle land atop a wetland cactus near Lake Texcoco, the hunter-gatherer nomads took the bird as a sign to settle there, building the foundations of their capital city Tenochtitlan by 1325. Employing a sophisticated system of agriculture and irrigation practices, over the next 100 years, Tenochtitlan blossomed into a city-state of more than 140,000 residents. While the great warring Aztec leader Montezuma, known as the father of the Aztec Empire, employed a mix of military conquest and commerce to build an empire of 500 smaller states of some 5 to 6 million inhabitants. Tenochtitlan's bustling Tlatelolco market, for instance, drove the Aztec economy with more than 50,000 people buying and selling on major market days. Known for its highly developed social caste system, with nobles at the top, followed by serfs, indentured servants, and enslaved workers at the bottom, the Aztec Empire reached its intellectual and artistic peak by the early 16th century, at the same time practicing a polytheistic religion that included the practice of human sacrifice to their gods, including Quetzalcoatl, who served many important roles within the Aztecs' holy calendar. The Aztecs also built majestic temples, palaces, plazas, and statues, while establishing a calendar based on a 365-day solar cycle and a 260-day religious cycle, the latter playing a key role in the Aztecs' ritualistic society. When Hernán Cortés and his Spanish conquistadors entered Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, Aztec ruler Montezuma II at first mistook Cortés as an envoy from the god Quetzalcoatl, who was prophesied to return that year in the Aztec calendar. While outnumbered by Aztec warriors, Cortés summarily ended the Aztec Empire through a combination of superior weaponry and the introduction of foreign diseases like smallpox, which killed off upwards of 40% of Tenochtitlan's residents in 1520 alone. After Montezuma died in Spanish captivity, his young nephew Cuauhtémoc took over as emperor before driving the Spanish out of Tenochtitlan, only to fall to Cortés on August 13, 1521, which led to the slaughter of some 240,000 people. After the destruction of Tenochtitlan, Cortés built Mexico City atop the ruins of a once great civilization. Francisco Pizarro. Born into poverty in 1474 Trujillo, Spain, at 36 years of age, Francisco Pizarro joined a group of 300 settlers led by Alonso de Ojeda to colonize San Sebastian in present-day Colombia. But when food stocks ran low, Ojeda left Pizarro in charge while he sailed on an urgent voyage to resupply the colony. During his absence, 200 settlers were lost to tropical heat and diseases, leaving the survivors no choice but to return to Cartagena. Undeterred by misadventure, in 1513, Pizarro joined Vasco Núñez de Balboa to found the new colony of Darien near present-day Panama, giving both explorers the distinction of becoming the first Europeans to see the Pacific Ocean from the Americas. A year later, Pedro Arias Davila replaced Balboa as governor of Castilla de Oro, and when Pizarro arrested Balboa on Davila's orders, which led to Balboa's eventual execution, Pizarro was rewarded handsomely for his loyalty to Davila, growing wealthy in his position as mayor of the newly founded town of Panama. Seeking to elevate his status as a major player in the age of exploration, Pizarro teamed up with Diego de Almagro, making 2 voyages down the west coast of South America between 1524 and 1528, the first ending in failure, while the second landed Pizarro in Peru, where he heard stories about a great ruler who reigned over the Inca Empire.
returning to Spain for a meeting with King Charles. The Spanish ruler gave Pizarro permission to claim Peru for Spain, promising Pizarro he could govern any and all lands that he conquered on his return voyage to the Americas. In 1532, Pizarro sailed with 3 of his half-brothers, Gonzalo, Hernando, and Juan Pizarro, into the Incan city of Cajamarca, where Incan leader Atahualpa was celebrating his victory over his brother Huáscar after a bloody civil war. Taking the Incan leader hostage, Atahualpa was killed in 1533 despite having paid a sizable ransom to save his life. Pizarro then conquered the city of Cuzco before founding Lima, and after relations between Almagro and Pizarro devolved into a power struggle in 1537 that ultimately led to Almagro's death, Almagro's armed supporters broke into Pizarro's Lima palace, assassinating the explorer on June 26, 1541, making the life and explorations of Francisco Pizarro a tragic downfall for the once great Inca people. Today in the Daily Dose, Hernando de Soto. Dreaming of making his fortune in the New World, at 14 years of age, Hernando de Soto set sail for the West Indies in 1514 under the command of Pedro Arias de Villa, earning a small fortune during de Villa's later conquest of Panama and Nicaragua. 16 years after his departure from Seville, Spain, de Soto had become one of the leading slave traders in Nicaragua, as well as one of the wealthiest men in present-day Central America. In 1531, de Soto teamed up with Francisco Pizarro on an expedition to northwestern Colombia in pursuit of a rumored cache of gold in the region. A year later, de Soto signed on as Pizarro's chief lieutenant during the explorer's conquest of Peru, defeating the Inca people at Cajamarca in November of 1532, later capturing the last Incan emperor Atahualpa before executing him in 1533, despite a large ransom payment by the Inca people to spare the emperor's life. Growing ever wealthier, when the ransom gold was divided, de Soto was later named lieutenant governor of Cuzco, before assisting Pizarro in the founding of Lima in 1535. A year later, de Soto returned home to Spain as one of the wealthiest conquistadors of his time, marrying de Villa's daughter before accepting a royal commission as governor of Cuba, at the same time accepting the challenge of exploring and settling La Florida, which had first been explored by Juan Ponce de Leon. Sailing from Spain in April of 1538, with 10 ships and 700 men, after spending time in Cuba, de Soto landed at Tampa Bay in May of 1539, setting up his winter quarters near present-day Tallahassee. During the spring of 1540, de Soto and his men explored present-day Georgia, the Carolinas, and Tennessee, and after no gold was discovered in the region, de Soto headed south to rendezvous with his ships near Mobile Bay, coming under attack by hostile Indians in October of that same year, which caused egregious casualties on both sides. Sighting the Mississippi River in mid-1541, the ever-ambitious de Soto traversed Arkansas and Louisiana by 1542, before passing away on May 21st of 1542 after succumbing to a fever. His unfinished expedition would be led by his successor, Luis de Moscoso Alvarado, which finally reached Mexico in 1543, with nearly half of de Soto's original body of men lost to disease, illness, and hostile attacks by Native Americans, making the exploits of Hernando de Soto some of the boldest expeditions during the age of the Mayans. Considered the most dominant society in Mesoamerica, the Mayan civilization flourished in 3 separate subgeographies,
from 1800 BCE until 900 AD, concentrated in a larger geographical block that covered the Yucatan Peninsula, modern-day Guatemala and Belize, parts of Honduras and El Salvador, as well as parts of the Mexican states of Tabasco and Chiapas, which proved to be a geographic deterrent from outside invasion by other Mesoamerican tribes. Mayans spoke a solitary language during the pre-classic period or early years of Mayan history, although by the classic period or golden age of Maya, from 250 to 900 AD, a wide diversity of languages came into play, many of which are still spoken in modern-day Mexico and Central America by more than 5 million people. Employing a combination of primitive and complex agricultural techniques, from slash-and-burn land clearing to irrigation canals and terraced fields, archaeologists and historians believe the Mayans flourished and grew on a reliable diet of corn, beans, squash, and cassava, eventually developing some 40 major cities with a total population of 2 to 10 million people, including elaborate cities such as Tikal, Huexectum, Copan, Dos Pilas, and Rio Bec. Excavations have unearthed plazas, elegant palaces, temples, and pyramids, as well as athletic courts for playing the uniquely Mayan sport of ulama, all the while worshiping to a variety of polytheistic gods who favored a hereditary succession of kings. The Mayans also contributed greatly to the advancement of mathematics and astronomy, including the use of zero in mathematics, while developing complex systems of calendars such as the 365-day calendar round and the long count calendar that spanned some 5,000 years into the future. They also wrote books known as codices on paper made from tree bark, while being credited with some of the earliest uses of chocolate and rubber. They vanished abruptly around 900 AD, and while scholars have postulated theories such as overpopulation followed by a protracted period of drought, no one knows with any certainty why the Mayan Empire came to such a sudden end, making the Mayan civilization an early frontrunner in Mesoamerican history.
Francisco Coronado. Born in 1510 Salamanca, Spain, Francisco Coronado's status as a second son cut off any possibility of inheriting his family's estate, prompting him to seek his fortune in the New World. Sailing for present-day Mexico in 1535, under Spanish Viceroy Antonio de Mendoza, Coronado married the daughter of a former colonial treasurer, which earned him one of the largest estates in New Spain. 2 years later, his successful put-down of a rebellion by black slaves and Indians working in nearby mines landed him the governorship of present-day Jalisco, Nayarit, and Sinaloa. Early in 1540, the ever-ambitious Coronado learned of vast riches to the north in the somewhat mythical 7 golden cities of Cibola, convincing Mendoza to back him in an expedition made up of some 300 Spaniards and more than 1,000 Native Americans, setting off from Compostela for an arduous 4-month trek to the first city of Cibola, which proved to be the Zuni Pueblo town of Hawica in present-day New Mexico. When the Zunis resisted Spanish attempts to subdue them, the better-armed Spaniards forced the Zunis to flee, yet not before Coronado was wounded by a stone. Failing to locate Cibola's mythical riches, Coronado split his forces into smaller search parties, which resulted in a group led by Garcia Lopez de Cardenas to become the first Europeans to sight the Grand Canyon, while a group led by Pedro de Tovar reached the Colorado Plateau. Wintering near present-day Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the spring of 1541, despite repeated attacks by hostile Indians, Coronado explored the Palo Duro Canyon in present-day Texas, before leading a smaller group into present-day Kansas. Returning to Mexico in 1542, Mendoza publicly dismissed Coronado's expedition as a failure, before opening 2 separate inquiries into Coronado's conduct as a leader. Cleared of all charges, Coronado was stripped of his governorship in 1544, passing away a decade later from infectious diseases acquired on his expedition north, making the life and explorations of Francisco Coronado a major contributor during the Age of Exploration. Hernán Cortés. Born into low nobility in 1485 Medellin, Spain, Hernán Cortés's restlessness to explore the New World landed him in Hispaniola by the age of 19, joining Spanish conquistador Diego Velázquez 7 years later on an expedition to Cuba, where he climbed through the ranks to become the mayor or chief magistrate of Santiago. By 1518, Cortés was in command of his own expedition to Mexico, but after Velázquez canceled the trip out of enmity for his young understudy, a defiant Cortés set sail with 11 ships and 500 men, landing first in Tabasco and later Veracruz, where some accounts claim he scuttled his own ships, so that his men had no other option but to follow Cortés on his conquest of the mighty Aztec Empire. Considered the wealthiest and most densely populated city in Mesoamerica, Cortés and his men entered Tenochtitlan on November 8, 1519, where Aztec ruler Montezuma II mistook Cortés as an envoy from the god Quetzalcoatl, who was prophesied to return that year in the Aztec calendar. Seizing upon the moment, Cortés took Montezuma hostage while his soldiers raided the city. Soon afterwards, Cortés caught wind of a Spanish armada from Cuba en route to arrest him for disobeying orders from Velázquez, escaping to sea while leaving Tenochtitlan under the command of Pedro de Alvarado. Alvarado massacred Aztec chiefs before Cortés returned to the city, igniting a rebellion by Aztec citizens that led to the murder of Montezuma and a Spanish retreat from the city. Unwilling to accept defeat, Cortés proved victorious over the Aztecs in the Battle of Otumba on July 7, 1520, regaining control of the city a year later, which brought about the downfall of the Aztec Empire. While Cortés was off conquering Mexico, Velázquez crucified the explorer back home in Spain, defaming his one-time understudy in the court of public opinion, prompting Cortés to undertake a public relations campaign in his defense, sending Spanish King Charles V a string of 5 now infamous letters detailing the lands he had conquered for Spain, as well as lurid descriptions of life in Mexico. After his return to Spain, Cortés spent much of his later years seeking recognition for his achievements as a conquistador before a skeptical royal court. Despite the bad press relating to his disobedience, he was awarded the title of Marquesado del Valle de Oaxaca before passing away from natural causes in 1547, forever cementing Hernán Cortés as a luminary figure in the Age of Exploration. The Incas. Known as Tawantinsuyu, or the Land of Four Quarters, the Incan Empire began in the Andean mountains of South America during the 12th century, descended from pre-Incan groups in the region credited with creating the ancient Nazca lines, gradually expanding their territory through military conquest and the diplomacy of their emperors, eventually spanning some 2,500 miles from northern Ecuador to central Chile. At the empire's peak during the reign of the 8th Incan Empire, Viracocha Inca, in the early 15th century, the Incan Empire grew to some 12 million inhabitants from more than 100 distinct ethnic groups, forming a cohesive state due to shared religious beliefs and a common language. Known for their expansive irrigation and transportation networks, including 15,000 miles of interconnected roads, the Incas employed relay runners to carry messages across the vast Incan Empire at an impressive rate of 150 miles a day, thanks to the ingestion of coca leaves, which is the unrefined plant-based precursor to cocaine. Most Incas were self-sufficient farmers who tended to corn, potatoes, and squash, llamas, alpacas, and dogs, while paying taxes through public labor, which led to the construction of mountain palaces, city-states, and temples, where high priests diagnosed illnesses, solved crimes, and predicted the outcome of planned military campaigns. The Incan people also developed surgical techniques, sophisticated calendars, intricate textile patterns, and decorative yet functional ceramics, as well as gold and silver jewelry and art. Much like the Mayan and Aztec empires to the north in Central America, the arrival of Spanish explorers in the 1500s spelled an end to the Incan Empire due to the superior weaponry of the Spanish and the introduction of foreign diseases like smallpox and influenza, which eventually wiped out 90% of indigenous populations in North, Central, and South America. Driven by rumors of Incan gold, Spanish conquistador Francisco Pizarro lured Incan Emperor Atahualpa into a meeting in November of 1532, later killing him before sacking the Incan stronghold of Cusco in late 1533. 36 years later, the Spanish captured the Incas' final jungle town of Vilcabamba, ending the Incan Empire by capturing and executing Tupac Amaru, the final heir to the Incan throne, making the Incan Empire one of the most advanced civilizations in Mesoamerican history. Samuel de Champlain. Born in 1574 Brouage, France, Samuel de Champlain traveled to Spain and the West Indies with his uncle before accepting a job as a cartographer for King Henry IV from 1601 to 1603. Sailing to Canada in 1603 under the command of François Gravé Dupont, the group sailed up the St. Lawrence and Saguenay rivers, further exploring the Gaspé Peninsula before arriving into Montreal. Proving his usefulness on Dupont's expedition, in 1604, Champlain was named geographer on an expedition to Acadia under the command of Lieutenant General Pierre du Gardemont, exploring present-day Nova Scotia, the Bay of Fundy, and the St. John River, before building a fort on a small island atop the St. Croix River to wait out the winter months. In the summer of 1605, Dumont's team sailed down the coast of New England to Cape Cod, where Champlain became the first European explorer to write a detailed accounting of present-day Plymouth, Massachusetts, a solid 15 years before English pilgrims settled in the region. Advancing to the rank of lieutenant under Dumont, in 1608, the group again explored the St. Lawrence, building a fort at present-day Quebec City, which would soon become the teeming heart of the French fur trade. Voyaging deep into the Canadian interior in 1615, Champlain and his team of Huron people attacked the Iroquois, resulting in the aggressors' defeat when Champlain took an arrow to the knee. Unable to walk, Champlain wintered with the Hurons near Georgian Bay, composing one of the most detailed accounts of its time of Native American life. Returning to France to face a withering string of lawsuits, Champlain composed a number of accounts of his voyages, replete with maps and illustrations, returning to Canada after his commission was reinstated, with a new wife 30 years his junior. Appointed governor of New France by Louis XIII's chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu, French control of the lucrative Canadian fur trade was soon displaced by the English, who lay siege to the fort until Champlain surrendered on July 19, 1629. Returning to France until the signing of the Treaty of Saint-Germain-en-Laye, which handed Quebec back to the French, Champlain returned to Quebec yet again as its governor, retiring in 1633 due to failing health, before passing away on Christmas Day, 1635, making the life and voyages
of Samuel de Champlain, a keystone figure during the age of exploration.
The explorations of Henry Hudson. Born sometime in the 1560s, Henry Hudson spent most of his life at sea, first as a cabin boy before working his way up to ship's captain. In 1607, the Muscovy Company of England hired Hudson to find the rumored Northwest Passage to the Pacific coast of Asia. At the time, the English were engaged in an economic battle with the Dutch for control of Northwest shipping routes, and it was believed that since the sun shone for 3 months straight during the summer months in northern latitudes, that a ship could manage a shortcut to Asia when the ice finally melted at the top of the world. Exploring the east coast of Greenland with a 10-man crew and 1 cabin boy, icy conditions eventually forced Hudson to return to England empty-handed, although his report of large numbers of whales off Greenland provided the catalyst for whaling expeditions into the region by a number of seafaring nations. In 1608, English merchants of the East India and Muscovy companies again commissioned Hudson to locate a passage to the Indies, this time to the east around northern Russia, but again, icy conditions forced him into retreat. Yet again in 1609, Hudson was chosen by merchants of the Dutch East India Company to find an easterly passage to Asia. When ice again thwarted his instructed route, Hudson pointed his ship west, seeking a passage through North America. After pillaging a small native village of fur traders in Nova Scotia, Hudson sailed south into the mouth of the Chesapeake and Delaware Bays, before sailing up the Hudson River past present-day New York City. His voyage would later be used to establish Dutch claims to the region, colonizing New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island in 1625. Hudson's final voyage in 1610 was funded by the Virginia Company and the British East India Company aboard his new ship Discovery. After setting sail from England, on June 25th, the explorers reached what is now the Hudson Strait on the northern tip of Labrador. Excitement was high on August 2nd when Discovery entered Hudson Bay, for the crew firmly believed that at long last, Hudson had found the Northwest Passage through the North American continent. Hudson spent the following months mapping and exploring the eastern shores of Canada, but in the end, Hudson failed to find his elusive passage to the Orient. In November, however, the ship became hopelessly trapped in ice at James Bay, forcing the crew to move ashore for the winter. When the ice melted in the spring of 1611, most of the crew mutinied, setting Hudson, his son John, and 7 other Hudson loyalists adrift in a small open boat. After a Herculean effort to row behind the departing ship, Hudson and his men collapsed in exhaustion, never to be heard from again.